Hello everybody, welcome back. I had gotten this video come across my desk and I figured that it might be an interesting topic for maybe me to weigh in on and react to. So maybe I can give some good insights. I definitely think that given my history, I probably could give a little bit more to the conversation. But who knows? We'll see how it goes. I'm kind of interested in this video, so I decided to save it for this. All right, let's get into it.
This is probably one
Oh,
of
it's
the
very loud. Hang on.
best essays I've written on the internet all week.
Oh, you wrote
by
this?
David Dennison
Oh, that's
on
cool.
Substack, and it's titled "Why Your Son Is Right Wing." The
Wait, did
author
she say
is
that she wrote it?
and it's titled "I've written on the internet all week."
Read
This
it.
is by
Read.
David
Okay.
Dennison on Substack, and it's titled "Why Your Son Is Right Wing." The author is a millennial teacher, and he's also
Okay.
a father of a son. So he has had a front row view of what has happened to Gen Z over the last decade, and he makes a really
They've been beaten over the head that they are bad and they no longer want to be called bad.
compelling case why Democrats have lost the plot and why young men are increasingly becoming more and more conservative. I don't think that his answers will surprise you. I think this will make sense to a lot of people. But I think he's really highlighted
Well,
that
I think
damage has been done.
I think the problem is that the answers might not surprise us if I think this is going where I think it's going, but it sure as heck will surprise the people who are surprised by it.
And it's probably going to take another decade, or not a decade, I'm sorry, a generation to undo what has been done. And so I
Maybe.
think this is really shows there's a nail in the coffin for Democrats.
We
And
kind of
there
live
is
in
no
unprecedented times in the
recovering
sense that the
from
internet
this. So he opens it up
has
talking about how his
expedited a lot of
earliest
generational
childhood
change.
memory, political childhood memory, was in his early years, so about 8 years old. And so this is a reference point he uses throughout the piece. I mean, for me, I'm a millennial too. I'm a little bit younger than him, but for me, like 9/11 was definitely a pivotal moment.
I remember
I think
that.
everyone can agree. And I was a week shy of my 10th birthday when 9/11 happened. So
I wouldn't say that that was a big political event for me, mostly because I grew up listening to a particular man called Rush Limbaugh on AM radio ever since I can remember. I very distinctly remember coming home from kindergarten listening to that because my dad would listen to it on the way home when he picked us up. So my political awakening, so to speak, happened very early in life, which makes sense if you knew me in real
was
life.
around, right? I remember like Y2K and things like that, but really things crystallized for me starting with 9/11, and I think the same is probably true for others my age as well. And so he opens this up saying, "We tend to talk about partisan swings in terms of shifting preferences. The observation that young voters, men especially, have been trending Republican for at least 5 years is treated as a PR problem for the Democrats. The general belief is that something has tempted these youngins to the dark side, and putting things right requires our finding the magic words to lure them back to the light." And this is absolutely true. This is why the Democrats have allocated $20 million and they're hiring all sorts of consultants and convening.
Right. I think that, at least the last part of that, I can't really comment on the first part of that, but the last part of that is insightful in the sense that the Democrats seem to think that they're not wording it correctly and that we already agree with them, or at least that's kind of what I'm reading from that, if I'm going to take a literal interpretation. And I think that's just not the case, because the Democrats, or rather the people who are being criticized by this piece, which may include Democrats but might not be limited to Democrats, don't understand that the generation doesn't agree with them. And they have a hard time reconciling that because they just can't believe that their opinions or their ideas are objectionable.
convening in strategy
which is
sessions
the
in
problem.
hotel ballrooms, trying to figure out how to talk to young men. They think they need to find their version of Joe Rogan without realizing that
Good
they
luck with
had a
that
Joe
one.
Rogan.
Yeah.
His name was Joe Rogan, and like so many other
Well,
Democrats
it
or
doesn't matter
former
anymore
Democrats, the
because
party
they're running
alienated
so
all
far
these people,
away.
myself included. So it's
Like,
not.
well, they're running so far away that the best way to describe your political leaning is whether or not you align with the progressive Democrat agenda. And if you don't, then you are literally just a Republican at this point. Because they will call you that, and you align more strictly with the values of the Republican Party in the sense that we offer a free exchange of ideas. I say we, I don't really mean we, but I think it probably can come out fairly strongly where I tend to lie, so to speak, on the political compass. But again, their issue is they just don't understand that because they continue to push in one direction, they're pulling the bottom of their ideology further and further away. And by defining people in terms of whether or not they are or are not, and that are not is defined as a specific thing, everybody under that definition becomes what they don't want them to be. So my favorite thing is when people say, well, I don't agree with them on this, and I can't believe that they don't share the same opinion with me, and now they're calling me right wing. It's like, yeah, congratulations, you are now in the Republican Party because you failed the purity test. And I for one welcome all new members, so to speak, because I would much rather people come to the side of actually talking and exchanging ideas than engineered consensus.
Not a PR problem. It's something much more perverse than that. And so, one of the
True.
things he brings up, and I think this is really relevant, is that we treat generational cohorts like they're a fixed group of people with unfixed opinions. And he says here, every year we graduate our 29, so 29-year-olds becoming 30-year-olds into the older bracket,
Sure.
and we welcome new 18-year-olds into the fold. So what has happened over the last decade is basically millennials have aged out of young adult status. We're now like, I don't know, mid adult. We're all in our 30s into 40s right now. So obviously our politics have changed because we've gotten older and taken on new roles in life. But we're no
You've gotten
longer, the
wiser.
18 to 29-year-old cohort. And so Gen
True.
Z has grown up and aged into that cohort. And unlike previous generations, they have brought a new, entirely different political philosophy with them. So, in the past, you could reliably expect a lot of young people.
So if I'm understanding correctly, I'm trying to just follow this. What was stated is that Gen Z is aging into the 18 to 29-year-old demographic that millennials are currently aging out of. That's what I understood from what was being said.
To be far more liberal. And then the saying always goes like, once you turn 30, you start becoming more conservative. I mean, this was definitely true for me. May have been true for you. I think that's in part due to just lifestyle changes, right? Like you get married, you have kids, you buy a home, your priorities change.
You get more life experience, and you realize
like,
that
your interests change. Like
the pie in the sky ideology
20,
of everybody
like,
loves everybody just isn't the case. It isn't true and will never be true.
Protect, and if I didn't, I was going to lose reproductive health care. Like that resonated with 23-year-old feminist Amanda far more
so sorry.
than it does 34-year-old Amanda. Now my views have completely changed, and I see abortion is morally bankrupt, and I don't think it's a privilege, and I don't think it's healthcare, right? And so my views on that have obviously changed. And so I think as people get older,
I think a lot of people fall under that.
The problem that the Democratic Party is facing is that it's these younger 18 to 29-year-old guys who are skewing more conservative than in generations past. And so the Democrats are running around trying to figure out why that's happening. He says here, if 8-year-olds just to use my personal example, is around the time political sentience awakens. So the time, you
Okay.
start having awareness and memories about the political world around you. That means that today's youngest voters were first learning what politics was just as woke was getting into full swing. Which
True.
is to say, the
I could see
opinions
that.
they have brought with them into adulthood were all forged in one of the most bizarre cultural crucibles the modern era has ever known. And so
I think that's probably I think that's a good insight. And if it's going where I think it's going, it's 100% true. People, when you are like, I think a good way of looking at it is the way that history, people tend to say, repeats itself, but really a better way of saying it is history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And what we're looking at here is kind of the same thing that happened during like the hippie generation, where they were raised in a type of environment, and when they aged into being adults, they were playing and bucking against the system that they grew up in. And well, here we are again, except this time the hippie movement is conservative.
to give you context of what this looks like, Gen Z, their age cohort is about 1997 to 2012, and so they would have hit age 8 beginning in 2005 and going up through 2020. So that means the oldest Gen Zers would have started high school around 2011, and that would make sense because that is when a lot of the woke stuff started. Like I have no memory of woke.
I remember around that time, and it was a very big shock to me because not to give you exactly how old I am, but 2010, 2011, 2012 were around the time in which I was becoming an adult. I remember waking up one day, going to school, and hearing about these new ideas that people were throwing around that we would now terminalize as woke. And I was like, what is this garbage that people are talking about? Like, don't get me wrong, when it started, some of it was like, okay, I can see what the progressive like movement is trying to say. And I think that there were some good moments at the beginning where I definitely feel a lot of people moderated, especially with the, hey, if if a man and a man want to get married, who cares? And I totally agree with that. Who cares? It's not my business. It's not the state's business. It's nobody's business. And by my own logic that I use for anything, it's right. So yeah, fair play. Who cares? But as people have been growing up and they've been continuing on with the progressive movement, the asks became bigger and bigger and people started to sour on it. So I remember very distinctly when this started happening.
And like the whole woke stuff is
and that's the time frame for sure.
I've been trying to rack my brain and go back in time to figure out if this stuff had come up, and I was just like completely unaware.
It 100%
and
did.
There were some things that did come up in college, right? Like I wasn't necessarily handed feminism on a silver platter and told to believe it, but I had teachers and professors around me who
you weren't
were
really handed feminism, so to speak. You were handed third wave feminism, which is a completely different form of feminism than feminism typically is.
Multiculturalism, and that we were citizens of the world. I was also an international relations major, so that might have had
Oh,
something
I'm
to do
so
with it.
sorry.
But like the whole way.
I'm so sorry you had to be an international relations major. I know some international relations major. I mean, I went to college for politics. Don't even get me started. I know every time I say that, I'm like, ugh, ugh. I kind of herk a little bit on the inside, but especially with that whole citizen of the world thing that she was talking about, that was definitely a major ideology at the time. And at the time, I had thought that might be the future and where we were going. But as time went on, I realized there's a lot of flaws in that argument. like I don't know if she's going to talk about this, but I do want to talk about this for a second, because this was a massive outbranch from what would be called the constructivist constructivist movement in was it in political thinking, or at least political theory. And what the tenets of it were that the world is a construction of systems that we as society have built for it. And it's saying that society is only structured thusly from internal motivations and internal ways of thinking, so that if you could restructure the way in which you think about something, then it can be something else. So a lot of people always used to say that constructivism is just cop-outism, and it really is. Like, it totally is. But there is some truth in it that reality is what you make of it. But it is not the case in all. It is not the case in all cases. I had heard a really good way of putting it from, I believe it was a French thinker. I'm hearing this third party, but it's what is more real is, we'll just say, is France more real than a tiger? A constructivist would say that both of them are concepts and neither of them are real over the other or not. But in actuality, we all know that a tiger is more real than France, because France can disappear tomorrow just on a whim because people believe in France. But a tiger will act like a tiger regardless of whether or not you believe in it. So that means that a tiger is more real than France. And these people were trying to push forward, or not really push forward, but they were trying to propagate an agenda that we are citizens of the world, and what matters more is the world and not your country. And it was, it was a movement that was just predicated on the stupidest of assumptions.
White privilege stuff, like, I have no memory. Like, the first time I really heard about that was in 2020 with George Floyd, and I think that's the case for a lot of people.
Well, then you haven't been listening.
So many people like saw what was happening and felt like, oh my gosh, did I
Which
do
is okay,
something
most people
wrong?
don't.
I rushed out and bought 2 books, The Color of Law, and then Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. I bought them for Kindle. Immediately
I'm
sat
so
down
sorry you
and
had to
tried
read that
educate
garbage.
myself, as everyone was telling us to do. And I got through the first chapter of Ibram X. Kendi's book, and I could not continue reading it because all, like, his definitions were just completely out of left field. And he
he made them himself, or
he wasn't just
she
talking
made
about how to
him.
not be a racist and like how to respect yourself. Like, there was visceral anti-white hatred in that. So I couldn't compel myself to continue reading a book.
You can't be racist against white people.
An evil white racist. And so I, as, you know, an adult in 2020, can make that decision. But if you're a child, if you're going through the public school system and you're just handed this stuff and your teachers are telling you this stuff, like, you're not of your own agency to make choices and decisions for yourself. You're being.
So that's true. But the people who have been growing up, as we are talking about it, in this environment, have realized the absolute absurdity of the life that they are purporting that to them that it is, which is a good sign and is at least indicative that critical thinking isn't 100% dead. Thank God.
Spoon-fed and told what to believe. And so this is what he's saying here. It's that
I can't believe that they require some of Ibram X. Kendi's works in some of in some public schools. It's ridiculous.
They were in the school system, and then because the school system is where a lot of this was happening, was being passed down and.
But then again, I guess people in high school don't read anymore anyway.
They started picking this stuff.
So I guess it evens out.
And so during this period of time, those considered marginalized among this cohort were taught that they belonged to a multi-century legacy of hopeless victim, and they were taught exactly whose fault that was. So Black people, people of color, they were taught that the white man had destroyed everything and ruined everything, and you know, it was up to them to take
they're no good, very bad doo-doo faces. Yeah,
all over the place today. Leftist, white liberal women profess it. Angry Black women on TikTok profess it. Like this language is very much mainstream today, in which it wasn't a decade ago. And then he says those considered privileged.
I wonder. I would actually be very curious. I think this would be a really good research paper if somebody wanted to do it. Not saying that you need to, but I definitely think it would be an interesting research paper if somebody could do was it a lexiconal? Well, first of all, linguistic, but I want more of the lexicon of the language analysis to see the direction of language in the positive or negative and how it's changed from the early 2000s to now, because and then coincide that with the rise of immediate instant access to everybody being able to have their opinion online. And I mean, I think everybody knows what the common knowledge is we've been incredibly more negative towards one another ever since the internet became a major household thing. But then you can juxtapose that against, say, like an incredibly difficult election cycle. So like maybe Reagan in the 80s, or maybe even like, I think Nixon had a pretty bad election cycle too, right? But basically, I would be curious, or maybe even during the Civil War, that might be interesting too. But I would be curious to see how much negative language, in the sense of like, calling people bad things, or like calling them like, the end of America, the end of this, the end of that, you know what I mean. And I'd be curious to see what the delta between the two eras would be, mostly because I am firmly of the belief that it would be so astronomically weighted in terms of our time now that it should at least show that we are literally becoming more violent of a people, or at least more linguistically violent of a people. I don't know. I think it'd be an interesting research paper.
So white men were treated to what really amounts to an entire childhood's worth of side-eye, suspicion, and blame for crimes committed
Yep.
before even their oldest relatives were conceived. So basically being told that you are basically holding on to a social debt for the crimes committed of your ancestors. And it didn't even matter, to be
Yep.
honest. And this is what's like the wild part about this. It didn't even matter if your ancestors were even here. A lot of people forget this, but the vast majority of people living in the United States today.
Well, it doesn't even matter if your ancestors actually actively fought against it. I know that, my ancestors definitely fought against slavery. We know for a fact they did. We have their service record in our family history annals. But it doesn't matter, because I and everybody else gets lumped in with a massive monolith group that there is no plasticity for. It's that, like, this is the worst way of people lumping others together just for the purposes of dividing them. And I absolutely hate it. It's so intellectually dishonest.
Today are truly immigrants. They came during the first and second wave of European immigration in the mid 19th century and into the early 20th century. And then obviously more recent waves of immigration. They weren't here for the Civil War. Their ancestors weren't here during the Revolution, and they weren't here during the founding of the colonies when slavery was introduced. As a very small number of people. And I
believe slavery
really
was
proud of
introduced
the fact
before the
that,
founding of the colonies,
my
but
ancestry does
maybe
extend
formalized.
that far. So I'm a 15th generation American. My family came to New York and Pennsylvania colonies in the 1600s, but they were
Nice.
farmers, right? They were poor farmers. We didn't have slaves, and my mother's side of the family were German, and so I don't have documentation to prove this, but I suspect because of that period of time, typically those who came from Germany in the 1600s were indentured servants. I strongly suspect that my mother's side of the family was probably here in a state of indentured servitude. So there is no crimes
During
and
that
no
time,
penance for my family tree
Germany
to pay
was
up.
a pretty despotic.
Working the land
Or
and doing the thing
German
here,
area. It wasn't Germany, it was the Ottoman Empire, I believe.
So when we talk about even the crimes of the past, we're talking about a minority of a minority of a minority of people. Not even.
Well, I mean, like, you even have to have the debate, but you even have to have the debate of, how far removed do you need to be in order for you to not be culpable? Which is just, if you were to be making a good faith argument, we would already have elapsed the amount of removability that most people, that people would need to have. Because, like, the Civil War happened in the 1800s, and there were still Civil War veterans alive to see World War I. And World War One for us is in the distant past in memory. So we're talking like too many generations for people to be able to actually have an amount of shared culpability. It's just ridiculous.
The majority. And oh, by the way, slavery was introduced by a Dutch ship that came to Jamestown in the 1600s in 1619. It wasn't even the British. I mean, obviously over time, British settlers
It's
brought
all the
slaves with them,
Dutch's
and
fault.
wealthy plantation owners institutionalized it and became the the economy of the South. But it wasn't even like the original people who founded this country, the Puritans and the original founders. They weren't just like crazy evil white racists who were bringing slaves with them. Like it's something that evolved over time,
Yep.
and we've come to terms with it and fought a war over it, and here we are today. But to expect kids, Gen Zers, to pay for those crimes is just absolutely absurd. And that's basically what's been happening for the last decade. Okay, so he says, there's a reason we hold bigotry in disfavor, even when its most harmful expressions are prohibited by our laws. Communicating even subtly to entire groups of people that they are unwelcome, unwanted, or untrustworthy cannot help but alter how members of those groups see themselves. Of course, like white
And
men
it's a good way
have
of
experienced
organizing them against you,
years, but it's been
especially when you do it to a majority sharehold of people.
Within full view,
Imagine how that
them,
works.
We separated children along the boundaries of moral righteousness. Emphasis here on children. Like it's up to us, the adults, to steward them and shepherd them into adulthood. And we've basically, and he makes.
I've heard anecdotal reports of this happening, that they have actually at times segregated classes into people of color and people of non-color, white people, in elementary school classes. And when I heard that that was happening, I was like, what? Are you kidding me? So, of course, that's anecdotally. I think that there's actual some evidence somewhere floating around on the internet. But, I mean, at this point, I wouldn't be surprised, which is a problem in of itself, that I wouldn't be surprised that that was happening.
It's the case here that we've basically abused them over the last decade by indoctrinating them with this ideology. It says kids from the unduly privileged groups we're going to grow up seeing on TV, online, at the movies, at school, at church, at home, everywhere, that
or
they
at least
were
it's not working.
Unsafe for members of other, more innocent groups to be around. Their ancestors and predecessors had seen to that, boasting such a bad track record that they should expect different, harsher standards to be applied to their lives, probably also a degree of social exclusion and limitation. They should expect it to be harder for them to enter the workforce, harder for them to climb social and professional ladders, and harder for their contributions to be recognized or celebrated. And not only
I hate it when people tell you that it's harder for you based on an immutable characteristic. So it just becomes a crutch for people.
Knowing that they have a penance to pay for crimes they didn't commit. And this is just like when you're a child,
that cuts both ways too.
You can't push back. And the thing is, these kids have eventually grown up. The kids who were 8 years old in 2005 are young adults today. They're in the workforce. They are struggling. And so they're pushing back. And this is why you're seeing more and more young Gen Z men siding with the right, becoming more conservative. It's because they are pushing.
Like I said earlier too, one thing that might not be touched here, but they have no choice. Because if they maybe agree with the left on some points, which I think is more than fair, because I think that, the left, the American, I'm going to specify that, the American political system, the dichotomy between left and right, I think that dichotomy where you start having some ideas on the left that are good and help the country, there are some ideas on the right that are good and help the country, and there are a lot of ideas in the middle that are good and help the country. But the problem is the left has pulled so far into the left, at least again in the American system, that every idea that isn't left of Mao is now on the right. So they have no choice but to align themselves with the right because they have been assigned that alignment by the left.
Back against what they were taught as children. Their willingness to forfeit their respect and prosperity was a morally necessary
bold move, Cotton.
penance. Their sacrifice would help balance the cosmic ledger. When would it finally be balanced? Oh, probably not in their lifetime or their kids' lifetime, or perhaps even their kids' lifetime. What people don't understand, and this is why I take so much offense to this whole woke ideology, is that this is a deliberately designed social debt that is never intended to be repaid. It cannot be repaid.
By definition, it cannot be. You are 100% correct on that.
The only way, in theory, that you could repay a debt in kind like this would be to subjugate and enslave the people who participated in slavery and were the slavers of the past. So
to expect other people to prostrate themselves in front of them, bend over down on their stomachs, and treat them as if they are now the new thought leaders and the new leaders of the country.
Would be to square the circle and make everything right. You would have to enslave white people, and this is why you see a lot of genocidal language within these conversations coming from the left. It's not even just racist anymore. Like, there is inherent genocidal language where there is a strong desire to erase.
Remember, we thought it was haha funny in 2010.
Of the sins of the past. So this debt is not one that is intended to ever be repaid. The only way to repay it would be to erase the progeny of those who committed these acts in the first place. And that's where we're at. And that, yeah, I'm with these guys. Like, we got to push back against that. That is abhorrent.
No, you do not have to push back against it. You have to fight against it at every opportunity that presents itself and show them that it is not right or correct, that you are able to say that you want other people to die for a political difference or a past injustice that happened, at least, we're just throwing out a number here, probably like 10 generations ago. It's probably somewhere between 8 and 12, but that's not the point. The point is these people need to be shown that they are wrong.
Okay, he says, consider the political dimensions here. One of our two great parties followed around the plurality of American youth with a megaphone, screaming at them all throughout their formative years that they were greedy and wicked and needed to obediently queue up for a lifetime of quiet atonement. Was it really surprising that upon maturation, they chose to vote for the other party? No.
Again, they were forced to vote for the other party.
Absolutely not. And again, this is why you're seeing what you're seeing happen right now with the shift in politics, and why
also
Democrats have.
As a side note, for anybody listening, if anybody ever tells you that you have to think a certain way about something, you should just immediately assume that they are trying to manipulate you to believe what they want you to believe. In the sense that, like, in this instance, you are a greedy, wicked person. That might be true because all human beings are greedy and wicked. But if they are continuing to tell you that and not tell it to somebody else and say that you must think this and you must atone for this, they are trying to control you and they are trying to make you subservient to an ideology, always and only in your own mind. Come to your own conclusions about these types of things. Do not let somebody else tell you that. And the reason why I said earlier that, you know, everybody is greedy and wicked, it's not greedy and wicked, that's not untrue, is because on a base level, that's just how humans are. And I have come to that conclusion by myself because I have lived a long enough time to be wise enough to see that people are crappy people when they're not checked. But you should come to that conclusion by yourself. Find some way to either reinforce that as a thought process or debunk it. Do not let them just tell you that is the way that it is, and that goes for me too.
Lost young men, and they're not going to get them back. An 18-year-old white man today was 8 years old when woke kicked off in 2015. So this young man
didn't kick off in 2015 and kicked off in 2010, you know, but
right through elementary
again,
school,
we thought it was haha funny.
Is now in the real world, college, working, whatever, and this is the reality he has to deal with, and he's pushing back. Such an 18-year-old had his entire childhood dominated by an ideology that favored every conceivable identity group over his own, well before he possessed the intellectual tools to push back or defend himself. He was instructed that his intentional marginalization was right and natural because simply for being born as he was to the parents he was liable for a privilege he could never hope to pay off, even if he lived several lifetimes. And because this privilege is incumbent on who you are, it's based on the color of your skin,
Mm-hmm.
it's based on your gender, it truly is something you cannot pay back. And I think I have a theory. I don't know if this is true. I suspect this might be the case. I think this is why when you look at like the trans issue right now, you see far more vitriol and conversations are far more dominated with young men transitioning to women versus young women transitioning to men. And I'm not saying that it's not happening on both sides, because there definitely are
That is an interesting take that would probably be another good research paper. I can't comment on that. I don't know.
young girls who are being groomed and conditioned to believe that they live in the wrong body, and the only way to fix that problem is to become a man. But I think you're seeing a lot, at least, I don't know if it's quantitatively, but at least in the press and in conversations in culture and society, you're seeing it dominated by young men transitioning to women. And I think that's because they cannot absolve themselves of the guilt of their whiteness and of their manhood. Therefore, the only thing they can do is to erase it. You can't make yourself black. I mean, people have tried, and it doesn't work. So the only option you have,
it's definitely an interesting theory,
is to erase.
I could see it having
by becoming a woman. And I suspect
having some good research behind it if people were intellectually honest about the research.
More than people are acknowledging. Okay, so he pulls up a Manhattan Institute survey that was done. It was done in 2022, and it was for 1,500 recent high school grads. 82% of them were from public schools, and they were asked if they'd encountered a series of 6 woke-coded ideas while at school. For all 6, a majority had learned about the concept entirely directly from a teacher or
Please
from
go over what these ideas are.
So this talks to how indoctrination is happening in the schools and how schools were the first to be captured, and this is how these beliefs have been passed down. So the 6 beliefs are: America is a systemically racist country. In America, white people have white privilege.
Oh boy.
In America, white people have unconscious biases that negatively affect non-white people.
You ever hear the word unconscious bias, you run away from it because it is nothing but trying to manipulate you.
Is built on stolen land. America is a patriarchal society. Gender
there's
is an
the
identity
patriarchy.
choice, regardless of the biological sex you were born into. I'll say again, I was in high school. Well, so like I said, 9/11 was my formative year. So I was just
By the way,
about to turn 10.
All of these ideas I heard in and around 2010.
10 years old, and then so I would have been in high school from 2004 to 2005 to 2009, and so none of this came up when I was a teenager. I had never heard of any of this. Like I said,
I would challenge you, if at all on the long shot that you watch this video, I would challenge you to really sit down and try to remember what was happening in your life in classes at those times, because it was not as sinister as it is, or sorry, it was not as blatantly stated as it was now. It was more pernicious and sinister the way that they would do it, because they would hide it behind other types of languages, especially with the America is a supremacist racist country, especially when they were talking about things like the recent Iraq war. They would be saying that there were a lot of reasons why we went to war for that, and specifically it was because of oil, which then you can infer from that argumentation that it's because America wanted to maintain its supremacy across the world, and that we treat the world racistly because they're not white people. That was a train of thought that I 100% had articulated to me by none other than my government professor, or not professor, government teacher in high school. So again, I would sit down and try to remember, if you ever can, which is a little bit of an ask because, this happened a decade and a half ago, but remember some of the things that they were teaching in high school and see if you can try to follow the logical trains back to these reasons, because I know for a fact they were there. I mean, I lived it. I mean, you lived it too. But again, I think there's a lot of ways that you need to look at the language that they used, because their goals, again, were the same, but hidden behind different language.
The first time, like, I had started hearing things about like white
Especially,
privilege.
there we go. Another good one is especially the transition from calling American Indians to Native Americans. That happened in 2007 for sure. So that came from an offshoot of the America is built on stolen land ideology that has been, again, co-opted into the woke movement. But these ideas had started in the mid 2000s.
Maybe in like 2018, 2019. That's when like intersectionality started making its way into feminist conversations, which I was a part of. So I became aware of it like that. I still thought it was like a fringe thing.
Again, I'm sorry that you had to be part of those conversations.
Floyd, 2020, that's when like the lid came off and everyone was worried about their white privilege. But this was not stuff that was talked about in public school in the 2000s. No one talked about this. If you had told me,
I mean, again, yeah, I'm beating this to death, but I'm gonna do. It was 100%. It was there.
Like a 15 or 16-year-old version of me that, 2 decades later, we would be having conversations about gender being an identity choice. I would have thought you were high off your rocker.
If you had told it to me at that same time frame, I'd have been like, oh, it's only going to take 20 years.
Like, there was no concept.
I had this pegged from the very beginning,
and there was no way that would have
probably could have used a better word choice there.
Become a thing like that. That is just such a left field idea. And now, obviously, it's become so normalized and politically divisive. It's just absolutely astounding. So he says, I'm 41. I paid attention in class. None of this shit was on the curriculum when I was growing up. And again, like, same. I'm 34. None of this was on the curriculum. And I think it's because the things that dominated.
So he's 41. He is 7 years older than you. It was not on his curriculum because he went to high school in the 90s. Is that right? Yeah, he would have gone into the tail end of the 90s, maybe early 2000s. It wasn't happening at that time. It took 5 years to 10 years, which you fall under that average time frame, for it to creep in to society. And it started happening during Bush 2.
Our formative years were 9/11 and the 2008 financial crisis. And so that's how my politics was shaped. And I would definitely say, I grew up in a conservative.
In fact, I'm pretty sure that I remember Rush Limbaugh calling this out in 2003.
Evangelical household, not like super conservative. My dad would watch Fox News. I'd go to church, 2-3 times a week. But I began identifying as a
and everybody
liberal,
thought he was crazy.
In response to the neocons with how they handled 9/11, right? Like, I vividly remember 9/11. I vividly remember watching the bombing of Baghdad on my TV. On
I remember
CNN
that too.
When I was, in 2003, when I was like, 12 years old. Like, we
didn't watch it on CNN though.
I remember picking up the newspaper and reading about Fallujah and reading about Abu Ghraib and reading about Guantanamo Bay. And like, you saw this in the media too. Like, all the movies of this period of time, if you go back, like a lot of our war movies, and they're very violent. And so that is like the world I grew up in. And so once like I became aware of the fact that, they had lied. They lied about Saddam Hussein. They misrepresented what happened. Like, naturally, I began to move away from the Republican Party because they had a stain on their record.
And that is absolutely 100% fair. And I 100% am in total agreement that the Republican Party needs to excise the neocons from their party. I think that every normal, rational, centrist to moderate Republican person would agree with that. Neoconservatism is a political ideology or political framework, rather, to co-opt the Republican Party in order to make it more globalist. Don't be tricked by neocons. They suck.
Right? Like, who wants to support war criminals? And that's exactly, I mean,
Well, war
looking
criminals
back,
is kind of a
that's what
charged
happened.
language
Like,
anyway.
Colin Powell went to the United Nations and lied to the world that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. And we all know
Sure.
now that was an utter fabrication. And so how do you support a political party?
It's only a war
that
crime when
does
you get
that?
prosecuted for it.
When I came of age and was able to vote,
And nobody's going to
couldn't.
prosecute
Barack
an
Obama
American
was
over
this
that
new guy,
because
charismatic,
they're hosted
first
by America.
African-American president. Like,
imagine how
of
that
course,
works.
I got behind him, and that seemed natural. But for young people today, like
It seemed natural, but he bombed. I hate to tell you this, but he bombed more people than George Bush did.
the conversation has been
A lot more
totally
people.
different.
He also killed innocent Americans, by the way. I have under good authority that he killed some guy called Analaki or something like that. He killed a 16-year-old American from a drone strike in Syria. Should
They've
look
been
that
taught
up.
to hate themselves, and so of course they're reacting in much the same way I did, and people my generation did, but they're reacting in a very going back more conservative. So he says here, little Billy, first grader, is not your racist uncle at Thanksgiving, and he's not the guy in the cubicle next to you guffawing at 4chan.
Yeah.
Little Billy and his friends probably
goffing?
do not need to have their
What? Guffawing? What a word. And also at 4chan. Okay,
white
yeah.
privilege
4chan,
run
sure.
out of them,
That's where
or
he's
for their
looking at.
classmates to regard them as guilty or inflicting generational trauma on everyone else. And this is why he says this, and I think it's true. Like, this is child abuse. We have robbed children of their childhoods by imposing sex education to kindergartners, by requiring
Very true.
10-year-olds to choose their gender identity.
You should not be preaching political ideology to anybody under the age, I'm going to say, of 18. And the reason I'm saying that is because all scholastic endeavors should, at least until you are an adult, should be apolitical, because it should be focusing on developing their critical thinking skills, so then when they are an adult, they can make their own political decision. Imagine how that would be a controversial statement. Please prove it to me that it is.
By telling white kids that they're evil and awful, and like he says here, just as bad as your racist uncle at Thanksgiving. And it's not the same. Like, kids just want to be kids.
I don't know if you've heard Little Billy, but
and yeah, they might
he says some crazy
do
shit.
things, and you might make it might seem like they're being preferential, but that's not always entirely the case. Like, kids aren't just inherently these evil racists, right? They might not like a certain kid because that kid might do something mean to them, and that kid also might be of a
Honestly,
certain
kids are
color
probably
or
the most
background or whatever,
like the least
right? And
racist
so
people ever,
there's some
because
pattern
they
recognition
they
that
don't
kids
have
start
this
making from a pretty
they don't
early
have
age.
the
So
same
that could be part of it too.
predisposed
It's
issues
not
that adults
necessarily
have.
that kids are just evil and they're programmed with racism, and it has to be ripped out of them. We're the ones doing this to them.
No,
And even if we
actually, I think the problem is you're looking at this. You're looking at the result and not at what the actual goal is, because in them doing this, they are not attacking the child. They are attacking the adults that are raising the child, because what they are attempting to do is they are attempting to brainwash and indoctrinate your children in order to use them as a cudgel to beat you into submission.
We think that
Don't think that they are the target.
identitarianism is
You are
limited
the
to online
target.
spaces, which it is not. It would still be a problem that kids whose prefrontal cortices are 20 years away from full development are getting force-fed an endlessly repeating message that their sex and skin tone make them better or worse than others around them. So he's saying here, like, kids are increasingly online and young age. So this gets to like the adolescence series that was on Netflix, and talking about how the manosphere and internet culture is shaping how young men think. So that's sure, like they're being exposed to some of this stuff online. But he says even then, like that's
I
not
think that it's
entirely the
probably
cause of this. It's not
shaping a
because you
small
have
percentage
8-year-olds
of
listening to Andrew
males,
Tate.
quite
It's because
honestly.
you have
Not
8-year-olds
not a large
being told that
percentage.
they're evil white racists, and then they become 15, 16-year-olds, start listening to Andrew Tate,
At least,
and he starts
anecdotally, like I can say that most people think that Andrew Tate's a fucking joke. At least, again, that's an anecdote that I've gotten over a very large and broad swathe of people. So, yeah, take that for what it is, but I don't think they're influencing nearly as many people as they claim they are.
to help them make sense of what they've already been witnessing. So by the time they are adults, they're completely done with this. Like they have agency now to make their own choices. So that's exactly what they're doing. He says, but then for Gen Z, we decided, okay, let me come back, because he says for millennials, actual anti-racism, opposing racism by or against anyone was the order of the day. Racial prejudice was for the outdated and the unenlightened. Sexism was described.
For millennials, actual anti-racism, opposing racism, or by against anyone was the order of the day. Prejudice, outdated, and I have a problem with the word anti-racism because anti-racism can be a toxic term, because the best way to not be racist is to just not be racist. But when you have to be anti-racist, there is no way to then convince somebody to not be racist. You are either not racist and good, or you are racist and you are irredeemable. And you must be anti that person. You just need to be not racist, and then when somebody is racist, you need to convince them that being racist is bad. And you shouldn't be anti them, you should be accepting of them and trying to convert them back to what we societally and morally have decided is the correct way of thinking. Because if you do not allow room for redemption, you only push them further into their own bad ways of thinking. And you don't be surprised when those bad ways of thinking come back to haunt you.
To us, it's a sad relic of a bygone era. Yeah, I mean, that's how I remember things too. Like, racism wasn't an issue because if you were a racist, like, you were, like, unenlightened, uneducated, like, you were not a bad person, but you were just,
it was just a thing.
Like,
it was like
socially inferior.
No, it was just a thing. If you were racist, you were racist. Nobody really cared. We just were like, oh wait, I'm not gonna trust his opinion on anything because he's an idiot. But like, in that being, it became into you must now be anti-racist, and now look where we're at.
If that's the way to put it, like, you just haven't been educated, and so, like when even today, when I think of racists, I'm not thinking about corporate executives sitting in a boardroom somewhere. Like, the image of a racist that comes into my head immediately is some dude in, like, a holler somewhere, a big, large dude wearing overalls, a beard, probably smoking a pipe with a
That's a pretty racist description of a white guy, I must say.
Confederate flag in the background, like a hillbilly, like a literal hillbilly. Like, that's when I think.
How dare you use the H word?
When I think of racism, like, that is the image that comes into my mind. Not like corporate white collar people, not average everyday people. And I think that is true for most people. I think most people aren't racist. Most people or a lot of people might, again, look at pattern recognition and make certain decisions based on that, and I don't think that's entirely wrong. But most people are not, like,
no, patterns are racist.
They're not like that. So he describes millennials like that, and he says, but then for Gen Z, we decided that actually those evils were still totally with us. They explained everything, and the only way to even things out was to grab the air.
It is crazy, because if I were to put a qualitative value on which the decades of which that I have been alive for were the most racist, it would be the 2010s, 2020s, and slightly in the 2000s. And that's not because I'm a kid and earlier in my life. It's because the only times those things started to become a problem they were blatantly told to me that racism is a problem, and I can pinpoint the decade in which that started happening. It's insane to me that we have actually regressed to the point where we have resurrected racism.
Heirs of honor and privilege by the ankles and drag them under. And then something happened. They all grew up. So there was a decision by the adults in the room in our educational institutions that no,
I wouldn't call them
racism
adults.
was actually a problem, and that the kids needed to be educated in the crimes that their ancestors had committed, and they needed to pay penance for it. And frankly, I don't know like where this switch came from. Like, was it Gen X teachers that started implementing this? Like, I don't know like where this started coming from. I know people talk about,
Hang on, I'm gonna go ahead and move my mic a little bit. Yeah, looked like it was giving a little bit of feedback.
like critical race theory and that kind of thing, but it takes a while for ideas incubated in academia to transfer down to schools, right? And because teachers, you have to get your bachelor's and your master's, and you have to do all sorts of like requirements. So it's not like anyone can become a teacher. So these
I would
ideas were
agree that
transmitted in
traditionally
universities
that's how it
where
is.
teachers
Yes,
were getting credentialed, but I don't quite know like the point.
not so much anymore, but
when
traditionally,
this
yes.
started happening. I know like gender stuff.
1985, it probably started with the first scholars during the demotivation campaigns that were being run by the Soviet Union, which is we have good evidence for through Yuri Bezmenov. By the time 1995 rolled around, they had started laying the groundwork to make a second generation of essentially insane radical lunatics to start infiltrating the primary schools and secondary schools. In the 2005s, we start seeing the first fruits of their labor in order to start propagating their ideology towards children and make them softer towards more progressive ideals. And then in the 2010s, 2015 is when they really start going hard in trying to demotivate the majority of the population. I think that is an accurate timeline that represents what we lived through. And I think that 1985, 1980s generation of college graduates and mastorals and doctorates are the pinpoint, or rather the beginning of where this all started.
Started really kicking off in like the 2000s. So was this, I'm wondering, like, was this a younger cohort of teachers who were just entering into their careers in the early 2010s, and the older generation had like started retiring out, and so you had a replacement of more newer teachers with woke ideology?
No, it was a clawing, insipid, and creeping ideology that happened over multiple decades.
Female teachers predominantly. Like is that what the catalyst was for this? And is that how it started to really manifest? That would be something I'd be curious to see more.
Again, if you are watching this on the off chance that this comes across your desk, you should check out Yuri Bezmenov.
But I'm curious to know the demographic shift that happened amongst teachers to make it possible for this to really kick off.
Okay. Probably.
So he talks.
I would say that there's probably good evidence to support that it was meddling by the Soviet Union.
Democrats having their bizarrely difficult time understanding what these voting trends are actually telling us about the electorate. So the fact that young men are skewing more and more conservative. They've just spent $20 million to study young men in the hopes that they can understand and reverse their rightward drift. And so the narrative amongst
somebody sold them a bridge.
Democrats, or the assumptions that they're making about what that problem is, goes like this. Young men were left-wing 10 years ago, so millennial men were left-wing. Now Gen Z men are right-wing, so a generational cohort has changed, which the Democrats neglect.
Hang on. They are now right-wing. By your definition. That's important
to acknowledge, and this generational cohort grew up in completely different political circumstances. Ergo, somebody, Theo Vaughn, Andrew Tate, hypnotized them so they believe the new media
Oh yeah,
environment,
because
the
they're just idiots who get
uncontrolled
hypnotized by
media
everything.
environment of podcasts and social media is like waving some magic wand and saying magic words and convincing these young men to become conservatives. And so therefore the conclusion is we must seize this magic for ourselves so that they may be re-hypnotized back into the fold. And that would
So I will say that, the use of the word hypnotized might be a little hyperbolic, but I think this hits the nail on the head with the way in which they view the way in which people form their political opinions. They're not saying that they want them to reach the conclusion that they've reached through their argumentation. They're saying that they want to instill into you a way of believing through some type of direct means. They want to tell you how to think. Never let them do that.
explain why they're spending so much money studying young men trying to recreate Joe Rogan for themselves. And he says here, Joe Rogan did not trap a bunch of 18-year-olds in stasis, poison them with right-wing ideas.
Oh my gosh.
Like that text notes Bernie Sanders was a good choice for president, and then release them to answer Gallup surveys 10 years later as the same vernal youngsters. What actually happened, of course, was that a bunch of boys grew up to become voting age. Like they weren't indoctrinated by Joe Rogan. Like,
and they are also castigated by progressive definition to be right wing.
Probably are too. Like he has interesting guests on, interesting conversations. He is far from conservative. Like certain things he has opinions on, yeah, sure, but like you listen to some of the stuff he talks about, he is a far more centrist and I would say like liberal leaning person.
He is center left, 100%. That's what he's always been. He really hasn't changed to any other type of ideology, but he's accepted on the right because people enjoy hearing, or rather people who identify with the right enjoy hearing differences of opinions and engaging in good faith with arguments.
Uppercase, big L liberal like we see today, but someone who has more progressive values compared to, your hardcore conservatives. Like Joe Rogan is no Matt Walsh. And so if these people think
that is very true,
like, this is what's happening, like they're completely off base. He says, we trapped these kids in an ideological straitjacket against which they were not allowed to resist, against which resisting made them evil. Then we gasped in horror when they aged out of our stewardship and decided that actually they'd had rather enough of all of that. And this is what's happened.
Yeah, people want to just be left alone for the most part. And when you're being told that you can't be left alone, they'll buck against the system.
He's a father. He has a son. He doesn't want his sons to necessarily grow up voting for people like Donald Trump or listening to people like Andrew Tate. He wants them to be able to think for themselves. But
how controversial.
Not in a culture where they feel victimized, marginalized, or despised. And I think anyone with young boys right now is thinking the same thing. Like they're seeing what has been done and how young men are being treated. And unless you're a crazy leftist liberal, I can't think of a single parent who willingly wants to send their sons into the gauntlet and have them grow up to hate themselves, feel like they have to sacrifice their manhood on the altar of feminism, and that they're not allowed to have opportunities just because they're white men. Or men in general. It's not even just white men who feel disaffected. Like men in general are.
I think everybody feels disaffected.
And so I think this essay does a really good job encapsulating what has happened, because this isn't just a static problem. Like Gen Z is still aging. I think the youngest Gen Zers are 13. So this is a generational problem. So this isn't going to be something the Democratic Party can fix anytime soon. This is an existential crisis for them. And the only way that they're going to be able to continue retaining power is to continue, pandering to feminist women. So long as there's still a feminist base, like they will have that. Continue pandering to minority views and upholding those. And then, of course, importing illegal migrants or continuing to dole out benefits to folks on welfare programs. Like that is the only way they're going to continue to maintain a base. But as of right now, like they are not going to maintain a base. Like
I think a lot of people are souring on those too, to be fair.
There are no self-respecting young men who can be Democrats. And I've written about this and I've talked about this. You cannot be a young man and respect yourself in today's society and also be a Democrat, because the tenets of the
Tend to
ideology
agree with
of
that.
which the Democratic Party currently espouses requires you to surrender your manhood on the altar of that ideology, and no respecting, self-respecting man should do that. And so it is a zero-sum game. And then, of course, like, Democrats have their own a further existential problem, because okay, if your base is largely like marginalized, disenfranchised people, specifically I'm thinking of the LGBTQ community and trans people, okay, they're not necessarily repopulating the earth in large numbers. And then feminists,
Whoa, 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 whoa. Hold on there. You're giving them, you're getting dangerously close to giving them advice. You might want to stop.
who equally hate themselves, they're not repopulating in large numbers either. So the only path for longevity for the Democratic Party is to import people, so import
Yeah.
migrants, or continuing to encourage welfare queens to pop out children and be baby factories, which a lot of them are doing. Like, that's really realistically the only long game that the Democrats have, which is,
I mean,
terrible.
Their other long game is to indoctrinate your children, which is what we're talking about. But I think the other problem is we're not talking about the female perspective growing up through these institutions, because I think that, if I recall correctly, I saw a graph where females are leaning more rightward by number, but the ones that are leaning more leftward are much more left than previous generations, which, I think is an interesting byproduct of the situation in which we find ourselves. I think that they're able to, in some ways, bolster their numbers in the way that people come out of high school as. But again, it definitely is changing for them. It's definitely starting to become a problem.
And so they are rightfully concerned. I don't think there's any path forward for the Democratic Party, and unfortunately, I think that means what base they have is, I think, it's going to become further and further and more radicalized in response to what is happening to the conservative pushback that is growing. I mean, you're seeing right now with the government shutdowns, right? Like, the Democrats were like, oh, we'll capitalize on this. This will be a win. No, like, poll numbers continue to show favorability among Democrats sliding. Like,
Yep.
Republicans are picking up support, not necessarily because people like Republicans or like what the conservative movement has to offer, but it's a better alternative to what the Democrats are offering.
And because they're being told that they are now right wing by the progressive left themselves.
So a lot of people are
So they're like, okay, I
now,
guess if I'm that, I might as well vote for them.
Young men. And so I, like I said, this is a really fantastic essay, really well written. And I think he offers some insights as a millennial, as a teacher, and as a father of a young son. I think he has some really good takes here. So I'll link this below if you want to read it for yourself. But I appreciate you for watching this. I would love to know if you resonate with this, especially if you're a Gen Zer.
I very much resonate with this.
Being indoctrinated. If you care to share what that experience was like, I think that would help educate a lot of older people.
I'm going to level with you. We both grew up being indoctrinated.
Because, like I said, a lot of us
You just don't know it yet.
Don't really resonate with it, because this was a completely different paradigm when we were in school. And like, for myself, like, I can't resonate with what my grandparents went through when they were in high school, right? In the 40s and 50s, because that was a completely different world. So if you have some insights into like what happened to you in high school and how that shaped who you are today in your political choices, definitely share some thoughts in the comments below. Appreciate you for watching.
Why, thank you.
Love to hear your thoughts. If you like this, definitely like
I appreciate your thoughts on this article too. Bye-bye. Okay, wait, cancel. Boom. Well, yeah, I definitely thought that was a good take on the article. And I appreciate I do appreciate the opinion coming from what I am assuming is a former feminist and obviously a former poli-sci student. I definitely think that the timeline started a lot further back necessarily than when you thought it did. And I think that's mostly due in part to the fact that we lived this history and we weren't necessarily paying attention to it. But I think upon further reflection, we can very easily determine that we were the test subjects for this ideology. But yeah, I like this video. It was a great video. I honestly hope that, again, as I said, I hope you go and watch some Yuri Bezmenov, or at least some of his interviews, because I think it will be very enlightening to some of the questions that you proposed in this video. But yeah, anyway, so everybody go like and subscribe to this creator. I'm gonna hit that like. Sorry, I don't really usually like or subscribe to things on my personal account. I'm trying to fix that for myself. But yeah, definitely good video, and catch everybody later.